Hello and welcome to the Oxygen Addict podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors, precisionfuelandhydration.com. You can personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so you can perform at your best with 15% off your first order of electrolytes and carbohydrate fuel with the code OA23, precisionfuelandhydration.com. So welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Coach Rob Wilby, and every week I bring you an episode of this podcast to help motivate and inspire you. Before we go on, if you could do me a big favor, if you could hit like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or hit follow if you're watching on podcast delivery system, whichever app you use, that'll really help out the growth of the show. And secondly, if you're looking for help and advice with your triathlon or endurance training journeys, and you like what you hear in this episode or any of the other episodes, please get in touch. You can email us at help@oxygenaddict.com, or there's a link in the show notes. You can click to book a call with me or any one of the other coaching team. You can have a chat with us to find out how we can best help you achieve your endurance training and performing goals this year. So before we go on to this week's episode, I want to tell you we're going to be talking about the transition that's going to happen in the change in the seasons between moving from the time when we're doing most of our bike training indoors to starting to think about our summertime events coming around and, needing to get outdoors to do our training outdoors to prepare for the event, but also wanting to get outdoors and do our training, and take advantage of the weather that's nicer out there. So a couple of caveats before we get started and go on. I know not everybody is in this position right now. I know that some of you have been training outdoors all year long or all through the Southern Hemisphere winter, for example, or Southern Hemisphere summer, as it was, the Northern Hemisphere winter for us. Also, there's people who have still got 2 feet of snow on the ground at the moment as we record. So it's not about the timing of this show right now. This is about general principles that you can apply to your training at the time when you decide it's the right time to you to shift from the indoor bike training to the outdoor training. If that's not for you right now, come back to this episode at a later time, because every year I get dozens of questions from my athletes at around this point. And it's particularly pertinent for me because the men and women that I coach, mostly based in the UK, and as we're recording, we're mostly going through that transition right now of starting to transfer what was almost entirely indoor training during the winter to almost entirely outdoor training during the summer. People got tons of questions around the best ways to do that. So I've put together a whole episode with 9 big tips on how you can most effectively change from the indoor to the outdoor training mindset. Now, before we go on, a quick shout out and a word to our sponsors, Precision Fuel and Hydration. You can use their free hydration and planning tool to receive a personalized strategy for your next race. The planner will help you understand your own carbohydrate, electrolyte, and fluid needs for you, the kind of person you are, the kind of sweater that you are, the kind of events that you're doing, the kind of weather conditions that you're experiencing right now, because all the training and the preparation and the fitness in the world isn't unfortunately going to be enough on race day if you don't get the carbohydrate intake correct come race day, and if you don't get your electrolyte and your fluid intake correct on race day. You're also going to get a ton more bang for your buck out of your training if you get those correct in training time as well. So it's not just about getting this right for the race day, it's about integrating this into every session that you do. So they've got tons of information for free available on the website. And if you want, you can choose to buy stuff from them as well. But all the stuff that's on there is free, and you can apply it to whichever products you use. Now, I'm a massive fan of the products. I think their electrolytes are the best that are on the market because you can choose them in different concentrations to suit how you sweat and to suit what the weather conditions are. They highlighted, I think they were the first people in the industry to highlight the fact that traditional electrolyte drinks were just nowhere near strong enough to replace even a moderate amount of sodium or potassium that the average athlete was losing. So there's that aspect to it. But also they're now producing their carbohydrate gels, chews and drink mixes. Brilliant tasting, really great product. I love them. And I think they're a great company as well. So there's a big push for me for always to support companies who are doing the really good stuff for athletes like you and like me who take part in these events. You'll have seen the banners advertising at the PTO triathlon events last year. You'll see them at tons of different events this year as well. So get over and check it out at precisionfuelandhydration.com. And don't forget, you can even book a video call with them for free with one of their hydration experts to really nail your own nutrition strategy. So links are in the show notes to go and do that. And remember, you can use the code OA22 for 15% off your first order over at precisionfuelandhydration.com. All right, now then, all that being said, the word from our sponsors now out of the way, let's jump into our topic. So Ironman bike training, 9 essential strategies for training outdoors. So it was interesting, actually, this whole episode has grown out of 3 or 4 of the athletes we coach saying it's time to go outdoors and ride outdoors. However, either A, my FTP values feel far too high, feel far too low. I'm not confident riding my TT bike or even my road bike outdoors yet this year. And I've got an early season race coming up. What should I do? There's all of these questions that come up for athletes at the time when they're, I mean, really within Team Oxygen, we really think about it as 2 seasons, the winter indoor season mainly, and then the summer outdoor season. So how do we transfer our training from one to the other? And how can we change the same principles of the training that we've used indoors? How can we modify them to make them just a little bit more useful and a little bit more realistic and real world to be used with outdoor riding as well? So I've come up with these 9 tips and strategies for you. Some of them, for some of you, I think are going to sound really obvious, but I've just been through this transition myself. I got the bike out and been for my first outdoor ride of the year today, which is just unheard of for me for it to be so late. But with one thing and another this year, with health issues and other stuff going on, just hasn't been right for me yet. So I've managed to get outdoors, and the number of things that I've had to remember where I've sat there and laughed to myself and thought, oh yeah, the Garmin's not charged. I can't find where my pump is to pump the tires, of all that kind of stuff. So I thought, well, make a list of this stuff, then you guys can listen in. And if this is you about to go through this transition or going through it soon, hopefully it'll help you out. So first up, tip number 1, it's all about preparing for the transition from changing to mainly an indoor training mindset to mainly an outdoor training mindset. So it's key differences between indoor and outdoor training. And let's think a little bit about essential gear for outdoor training as well. So first up, the dynamic changes between training indoors and training outdoors. And the first thing I want to talk about here is power levels. If you ride with a power meter, this is specifically for you. If you ride by heart rate or ride by feel, this isn't going to be relevant to you because the changes are going to be roughly similar if you're just an indoor or outdoor trainer. However, if you're riding with a power meter, you may well see some big differences. There's no way for me to tell you whether you will be one of the 3 categories. You'll either be someone who your FTP values, your power values are very, very similar outdoors to indoors. Some people are much higher outdoors. They can just put more power out riding outdoors. Some people put much less power out riding outdoors. And so the key thing here to accept is you can't just use your indoor numbers and accept them as they're going to be the same, because often they're not. There's a lot of moving variables here. So we're just going to measure them to make sure we know what the difference is. Now, this first tip is really important. Don't assume that if your power is higher outdoors, that you've got fitter. And don't assume that if your power is lower outdoors, you have got less fit. It's not the case. People are just different. So it's really common that someone does the last indoor bike test of the year and I don't know, let's say they come out at 200 watts indoors. They test outdoors and they come out at 170 watts and they come back to me and say, Coach, I've lost 30 watts in a week. Well, no, you haven't. You don't need to worry about that. There's lots more to going fast outdoors than just putting the power out anyway. But some people are just going to find that there's a big difference. I personally am one of those athletes that has a big difference outdoors to indoors. I put out a lot more power indoors than outdoors, which makes riding the first rides outdoors really difficult on my ego because I'm seeing numbers that would be ballpark for me, 40, 50 watts lower outdoors than indoors. It's a really, really big difference, especially riding in a TT position on a TT bike. Less so on a road bike, but on the TT bike, very, very much so. So it's always a big challenging time of year. So that's the first thing to say. Look, it's okay if your numbers are different indoors or outdoors. The thing you're going to have to bear in mind, if the numbers are very different, is you're going to have two sets of numbers that you work from. And we advise our athletes in Team OA, if they're very different, have an indoor FTP and an outdoor FTP and change it in training peaks before you do that workout. So it'll be updated and reflected in the power numbers you're looking for in your workout. So obviously for me, I'll give you some rough numbers here. It was 290 indoors, 250 outdoors. That 40-watt difference, if I was trying to hit those indoor numbers outdoors, it would be putting me 2 power zones higher than I should be trying to work. And in some cases, I wouldn't be even able to approach getting FTP numbers up on the screen when I was riding outdoors, unless I was going up a really steep hill. So you just have to let that go. So it's okay if the numbers are different, but we are going to have to test and have a different set of numbers if that's important for you. So that's the first thing. We'll come back to talking specifically about the testing in its own point later on, but that's my first point. It can, and it will be for a lot of people, be very different one way to the other. Okay. Now then, the other big shift that happens when we're riding outdoors is we've got a lot more uncontrollables. We've got wind, we've got terrain variations, we've got road conditions, potholes, the state of the tarmac, the traffic around us. There's all of these things that we have to consider, and most of them are going to be slowing us down relative to how we want to be going. So bear that in mind. You're probably going to be traveling slower outdoors than you either think or hope you're going to be traveling when you first transition. So just accept that's going to happen. Accept that when you go out to do a 3-hour ride outdoors, if you go out for 3 hours on the watch, even a ride where you don't feel like you've stopped, you'll probably only see 2:45 moving time on the Garmin when you get back, because of the nature of getting to junctions and things like that along the way. It makes a significant difference. So build that in. And the last little bit to think about here on point 1 is considering the gear that you're going to need for going to ride outdoors. The weather's going to be very changeable like it is in the UK. You're going to have the right gear with you, and you're going to have to accept that race day is coming. I need to be training outdoors, even if it's very wet or even if it's very cold. I need to be getting used to this. So you need to be getting the right kit ready. So have a whole variety ready and in your drawers and ready to go the night before your big workouts outdoors. Have a little rain jacket that's going to keep you dry for 3 or 4 hours. I really advise investing in a Gore-Tex Shake Dry or a Gore-Tex Pack Light jacket. They roll up small enough to go in the back of the jersey pocket, and you can just have it with you all the time and forget about it. It'll make such a difference if you get caught out in a really heavy rainstorm for 10 or 15 minutes, as can often happen. So have that with you. Have the little jar of sun cream in the back pocket as well, for if the sun unexpectedly comes out and you need to get yourself covered. So think about the clothing that you're going to need. Also, have a think about the things that need to happen on an outdoor bike if it's going to be raining. So if your mudguards have been in the garage all winter and haven't been fitted for the bike, take an advantage of a lazy Sunday afternoon and practice fitting those. If you've got those clip-on, clip-off mudguards, practice fitting them and know where they are so you can quickly put them on your bike if you need them. Get back in the habit of using of that kit if you've not used it all the way through the winter. If you've got little lights on the bike that can flash front and back, these days I'm recommending to my athletes that you use those all year round. I'm going to come to talk about the Garmin Varia radar later on, and that's got a built-in flashing light. But just let the traffic know that you're out there. Just having a little flashing front light and back light can make a really big difference to that horrible situation where people say, a friend of mine was saying just the other day, she'd been hit by a car because the car had the sun in her eyes and it turned across directly in front of her. She couldn't believe that the guy hadn't seen her. And it's entirely down to the fact that the sun was in the driver's eyes and they couldn't see them very well. So a little investment in a 10 or 20 pound light that flashes out brightly and lets cars know that you're there is a really, really good, solid investment. So think about all of those things in the, number one, really there, the transition, the preparation for moving from the indoors to the outdoors. You can do a lot of that thinking, get all of those things in place before you even line up to go and do your first outdoor ride. Okay, tip number 2 is going to be safety first. This is going to be tips for safe riding in traffic, staying visible, and avoiding hazards while cycling outdoors. We've just touched a little bit there already on some of the things you can do to help yourself stay visible for traffic. The first big tip on staying safe here is assume that the cars around you haven't seen you at any time when you're not sure where they're coming. So if a car's coming out of a side road, the car's coming up from behind you, assume that they haven't seen you. I really am going to give a massive shout out at this point to the Garmin Varia radar. If you haven't seen these, it's a little clip-on light that goes on the back of your bike. And it also has a radar built in it that it senses when cars are coming up behind you. And it bleeps on the Garmin to let you know the car's there. And it gives you a little graphical representation on the side of your Garmin of how far away the car is as a little dot comes up behind you. If a car is traveling at what it considers to be a safe passing speed, the outside of the Garmin is green. If it's going a bit faster, it's orange. And if it's going really fast, it's red. And I'm sure everyone listening has experienced that. The car that comes by you out of nowhere and scares you half to death, even if it's given you enough room. The Garmin has been a game changer for me. I've only had it for about 6 months, but I won't go outside without it now. It will sense cars. I've had this, I've checked it. The car first appears and bleeps on your Garmin at the point where if you turn around, you can't not only not hear the car yet, but you can barely see the car in the distance. I reckon it senses it 200 meters away. And it really gives you that sense of, okay, there's traffic behind me, especially if you're riding on quiet roads where, you know, the cars might be a long way back and might be coming by you quite quickly. It's a real game changer. So that can be a real sense of just being aware that the car's there. And as you can see, the car's halfway up the Garmin, you can have a little glance over your shoulder, make eye contact with the car, make sure that it is pulling out to go by you, just helps you feel a little bit safer. So anticipate that the worst is going to happen, that the car hasn't seen you whenever you can. Try and make eye contact with the driver if they're coming out of a side road, so you're sure that they've seen you. And if you're not sure, slow down as you're coming up. It sounds a little bit like it's like a dad talking to his kid here, but I'm hearing so many stories of people being hit, damaged, hurt by drivers who've just not seen cars coming. That's a really big thing that you can do. Second little part of this is signaling and communication to those car drivers. Even when you make eye contact with somebody in a car at a junction, you can just give them a little nod or raise one of your fingers or your hand toward them as if to say, you know, you've seen me, that's great, thanks very much. Give them a little wave and say hi. It just adds to that idea that the car's seen you and it keeps you a little bit safer. And the other thing I want to talk about really here on safety tips, this came up a lot. I was on the Ironman UK Facebook group this morning, having a read through what people have put there. Hazard awareness when you're out riding. Unfortunately, at this time of year, potholes are really common after a long, hard, cold winter with lots of freezing. Be aware of where those potholes are. You have to be paying attention all the time, and you can't assume that the road is going to be clear or free of hazards. And if you have to swerve at the last minute to miss a pothole, you can put yourself at risk of the cars behind you. So if you're on roads that you know, pay attention to where those potholes are coming. If you don't know them, pay attention all the time and just expect the road surfaces to be really rough. Now, there's lots of feedback from the people in the Ironman UK forum of roads they've ridden and, you know, new potholes that have appeared over the winter that they haven't seen before. I'm not singling that race out because all roads in the UK struggle with this, but be aware that if you're going to a race, there might be potholes in the place where you're not expecting them to be. And even if you've been and ridden the roads recently on a race's course, they might have appeared since the last time that you were there. Okay. Tip number 3, adapting your training. What's the best way to modify your workouts and intensity levels to vary the workouts that maybe have been set for an indoor session that you can then use on an outdoor session? And it might not even be that they've been set for an indoor session. It's how to do slightly more intense, more structured work outdoors rather than indoors. And I think it is definitely possible to do structured workouts outdoors. It's nowhere near as easy as it is to do it indoors, but there's nothing worse than feeling like there's a beautiful evening after work and you have to go inside into the garage and ride your bike on the turbo because you've got a structured workout you really need to do. I encourage you not to do that if the weather's beautiful. My driving mission is get outdoors whenever you can, whenever it's safe to do so. So if it was a beautiful evening, the last thing I want anybody doing, especially my athletes who are listening to this, is staying indoors to do a structured sweet spot workout or cadence change workout. Let's find a way you can take these outdoors. So the first thing is, you're going to have to accept that the levels are not going to be quite as accurate outdoors as they would have been indoors, but that's okay. As long as you're somewhere in the ballpark, that's going to be all right. So a typical workout that I'll set for our athletes might be a 20-minute sweet spot interval where we go 5 minutes at 85% of FTP, 5 minutes at 95% of FTP, back again and back again to make that 20-minute chunk. If you ride for the whole 20 minutes, somewhere between 85 and 95, that's absolutely fine. And I'm effectively giving you permission to go and do that. If you're somewhere in that sweet spot zone, I'm totally happy with that. So go out and you can do that outdoors. Something you'll have to think about that's more challenging is 20 minutes of cycling is actually quite a large distance to cover. You know, for our very best cyclists, they might be covering 10 miles in that time. But most cyclists are going to be covering between 6 and 8 miles in that time. So you need a loop, or you need an out and back section that you can safely go up and down, where you can really focus on putting the power out, which is a lot harder to do outdoors than it is indoors. And a lot of people struggle with this when they're transitioning to the ride outdoors, because it is harder to put the power out outdoors, because you have to watch where you're going. You have to pay attention to all of those things. I think it's probably worth about 5% of the effort, to be perfectly honest. Indoors, you can put your head down looking at the floor, you can close your eyes, you can crank the music up on your headphones. Can't do that riding outdoors. So accept that that power is maybe going to be a little bit lower, but that's okay, because it's going to be right still relative to your outdoor FTP numbers. Okay, so you can still do a really good approximation of the ride outdoors. Don't have to exactly hit those numbers, but if it says a 20-minute interval, try and find a loop that you can ride that takes about 20 minutes. That's going to be my first really good tip for you. Okay, so that's dealing with structured rides. The next thing is the flip of this. Outdoor riding is really good at some stuff that you're going to need for race day that you cannot replicate indoors. So technique and skills, you can't replicate the technique and skills of cornering, ascending, climbing, descending, using the brakes, shifting positions. Just can't do it indoors. And it's really good to do it outdoors. So think of it like this. You're not losing part of the fitness workout by not being able to be on the indoor trainer. You're gaining a skills practice session. And this is especially relevant to you if you're racing an outdoor race that's very hilly on the bike leg. You are going to have to practice the ups, the downs, the cornering, the braking, the when you start braking, the how you lean into the corners. All of those tips are as important to your success and staying safe as the actual fitness itself. For anybody racing Ironman UK this year, for example, very technical course, lots of sharp uphills, downhills, blind bends, corners at the bottom of steep bends. Your bike handling and your ability to do that will be as important as your fitness is for that. So you're going to have to practice it. So get yourself outdoors. Don't see it as a negative. See it as a way to practice those skills that are going to help you on race day. And something else to think about is give yourself permission, as well as modifying the interval that you've done on the structured workout. Give yourself permission to change the recovery if you need to. So, for example, you might need to ride up a stretch of road into a headwind to be able to do the interval that you're trying to do. And you might need to come back down with the wind on the way back. And it might be that it takes you longer to get back to the start of the interval than you'd ideally like. You have to accept that that's just part of riding outdoors. You have to be a little bit more flexible on the recoveries, as well as flexible on the actual interval workouts themselves. Okay. Tip number 4, let's talk about how we actually measure your FTP outdoors and why it's different. Okay. So as I said earlier on in this podcast today, it is very common for us to have these 3 groups of athletes. Some of the athletes are going to have an FTP that's roughly the same indoors and outdoors. I would say that's less than 10% of our athletes. And then the other athletes are split 50-50. Some can put more power out outdoors. Some can put less power out outdoors. So we need to know what that is. We're going to do the same FTP test that we would do indoors. It's going to be a 20-minute maximum effort time trial, but that's much more challenging in terms of logistics outdoors than it is to do it indoors. So you're going to have to be smart and savvy. Ideally, if you're going to be doing multiple outdoor FTP tests every season, pick a course that you can go and replicate the next time you're going to do it. That's a really good tip for you, something you can use time and time again, and ideally do it under the same time of day in the same conditions, but at the very least have the same terrain that you do it on. That'll make things much more comparable from time to time. A really good tip for doing your outdoor FTP test is to enter a local 10-mile time trial. They are going to be roughly in the region, for most of our athletes, you're going to be somewhere in the region of 20 to 25 minutes, or at least 20 to 30 minutes, let's say, and the vast majority being in the 24 to 30 minute area. You can use that as your outdoor FTP test. Don't worry about the exact nature of needing a 20-minute test. Just do it over 10 miles, and then it's repeatable every time you do it. All you're going to do is do your 10-mile time trial as hard as you can possibly go, sustainably at an even power level for the duration of the ride. And at the end of that ride, we're going to take 95% of that power, that normalized power, that's going to be your outdoor FTP test. So let's say you put out 200 watts for 20 minutes, take 95% of that. That would be 190 watts would be your outdoor FTP level. It then becomes irrelevant what your number was indoors. Still use that if you're indoors on the turbo, but while you're outdoors, we want you working off that outdoor FTP number. And that's going to mean that everything becomes much more scientific and much more accurate. The training stress score that's generated by a ride becomes much more accurate when it's set to an accurate FTP. The recovery time it's going to take you is much more accurate. The correlation between how you feel and how the ride numbers look becomes much more accurate. And I'm sure everyone's had this experience of going out and riding and feeling as though they're absolutely whooped at the end of the ride, but the power numbers just don't look that big on the Garmin. It can be really heartbreaking. So make sure you take care of that, okay? Before you do your outdoor FTP test, make sure you've calibrated your power meter. And in fact, before every single ride, calibrate your power meter. It's as simple as that, especially during the summertime when temperatures can vary a lot. The power meter can become much less accurate or skewed in one direction or the other. So just set your Garmin up to give you the little prompt. As you turn the Garmin on, it says, calibrate power meter now, and just click yes, and it'll do it while you're still filling your water bottles. That way it just removes an awful lot of the errors that can be made, okay? So we've got the power meter calibrated before the test and calibrated before every single ride. We've got you out there using a local 10-mile time trial and ideally on the same course each time. Now, the reason I'm a big fan of using an organized 10-mile time trial is you've kind of got that benefit of safety in numbers without having people around you. Motorists who are driving a road get used to seeing a cyclist with a number on every, you might be a minute spaced on the road in terms of when the marshals set you off. But as they drive by you, they'll be passing 3 of you every minute. Everyone will have a flashing red light on. There'll be marshals out along the course, making the drivers aware that there's something going on. It's much easier to go fast under those conditions than it is if you're riding out on your own and potentially people are coming out of side roads and haven't really got an idea that you're out there trying to get a hard workout done. So make it as safe for yourself as you can. Get the outdoor FTP test done, ideally in a situation where there are other people around and those other people are alerting motorists to your presence. If you can't do it in a 10-mile time trial, try to get up really early to get out to do it. So there's minimizing the risk of the traffics on the road. Or if you're someone who lives in the center of a city and it's really, really hard to get to any kind of road, you can do that. Something some of our athletes came up with recently was going to the outdoor velodrome down in London. I think it's at Herne Hill. They did their outdoor FTP test there and said it was awesome because they got to actually do the test without loads of other people around them, which they could never do on the roads around there. So any listeners who are down in London or you've got an outdoor velodrome near you, get yourself on that, get in one of the free ride sessions, and you can go and do your FTP test there. So that's a really clever way that you can minimize the risk to you, and you've then got those numbers. Once you've got the test done, once it's in the bag, update your numbers so that you personally know what your indoor numbers are and what your outdoor numbers are. And every time before you go outdoors to ride, change training peaks threshold numbers so they match your outdoor numbers. And if you're going to ride indoors from that point, you're going to have to change them back again. So there is a little bit of admin to do, but it's a small price to pay for your numbers being accurate. Okay, now, a lot of athletes have said to me, why have I got an outdoor FTP test at the start of April when my race isn't until July or August? We're really pushing the idea with our athletes of getting the outdoor FTP test done as soon as we're switching to mainly outdoor riding. That way, all of your outdoor rides are really accurate relative to your FTP levels. In previous years, I've really pushed to the athletes and said, you have to do an outdoor FTP test 4 weeks before your A race, so we know your power levels are right. What's occurred to us is there are some athletes for whom that's their first outdoor FTP test of the year, and they haven't done a time trial or haven't done another race that year. And that's too late. I want it doing at the start of the year, so we're working to accurate outdoor numbers all the way through. Okay, point number 5 is training outdoors. We're going to need to embrace the elements. So let's talk about some strategies for coping with the things you're going to face outdoors that you're not going to face indoors. So facing weather variations, facing terrain variations, and the mental resilience that you're going to need to deal with that. So first up, the weather variations you're going to face that are going to affect you are going to be either really wet days or really hot days or really cold days. So it's as simple as having a set of clothing and a survival structure in place for each of those situations. Get yourself that really good rain jacket for the really wet day, and then you can get out and ride with that and the mud guards on, a set of waterproof over booties and the right clothing. Technology has moved on so much these days, you can comfortably ride outdoors, even in the worst torrential downpours. So take care of that and have the right clothing for the wet weather. If it's unusually cold, wrap yourself up and do what you do in the center of winter and have the hat with you, the gloves with you, all the things that are going to keep you toasty. If it's exceptionally hot, this is where things are going to get a little bit more challenging, because there are only so many things that you can do to mitigate the effects of heat when you're out on the bike if it's especially hot. And it might be like that come race day. So on the one hand, we've got the option of saying, well, look, we're in the middle of a heat wave and it's 40 degrees. If we can avoid riding in the heat of the day, that would be the smart thing to do. We want to look after ourselves as much as we can here. The flip of that is, if you're going to race in Europe, if you're going to an Austria or a Germany or a Roth or places where it has been 35 to 40 degrees on race day on multiple days, it is going to be in your interests to be heat adapted. And so training in the heat and the run up to it is not only going to be wise, it's going to be necessary. So think about ways that you can stay cool on the bike when you're out there. You can spray water over yourself as you're riding, but you're going to have to find a way in training to get more water. So that might be loops past your house, it might be going to a petrol station. There are things you can do, but you have to plan it up in advance. The second part of this is the mental fortitude aspect of it. You have to accept that it is going to be unpleasant and that you're going to have to get through it. If you're preparing for a race in the UK, the chances are at least one of your races this year is going to be extremely wet and unseasonally cold. And probably one of them is going to be unseasonally hot and uncomfortable as well. So training to prepare for that is important, but mentally preparing for the fact it's going to be like that is just as important. And I worry about an athlete who never goes out to do a ride in the rain, because what happens if it rains on race day? You can't just decide that it's the first race of the year and you're going to ride in the rain. You have to get used to what your body needs to wear to stay warm enough but not overheat in the rain. So think about what you might face on race day and do the rides that are necessary to prepare for it. The mental fortitude aspect of it, I think, is just as important as the physical fitness angle. And I think I stressed this earlier on, it might rain on race day. It might be really cold on race day. It might be really hot on race day. You have to prepare yourself for that, and you have to have everything done in training so that you know you can face it on race day, and then have the kit with you on race day to make sure you can deal with it. Now, tip number 6, this is on route planning and exploration. It's a fantastic opportunity for you here to go out and see new places to ride in. So using technology, you can make use of Garmin's mapping features. You can map out a ride in an entirely different area, and even driving the bike in the car for 30 or 40 minutes in a different direction means you can ride the entire ride in a different place and get back safely to the beginning. I really think it's worth not just focusing on trying to get your training done as a tick in the box ready for race day. Use it as an opportunity to go and have an adventure. Where we live, I can drive 30 minutes to the west and be over into the Welsh Hills. I can drive 30 minutes to the east and be over in the Peak District and have access to massive variety of terrain and places I would never see otherwise. So give yourself that treat of a couple of times a year, get out and ride somewhere completely different and really enjoy the scenery that's out there, because a big part of doing this is you're getting fit so you can have great adventures. You're not just getting fit so you can do a race on race day. A tip on time management for riding outdoors for you is it always takes longer in training than it does on race day. So that means if you are going out to do a 3-hour ride on your watch, you'll probably only have covered 2 hours 45 ride time when you get back. And the flip of that is, if you're going to ride the course that you're going to be racing, it's quite common for an athlete to come back and say, I rode 1 lap of the 2-loop bike course and it took me 3.5 hours for 1 lap. It's going to take forever on race day. Remind yourself that it always takes longer to ride it in training, and it's going to be faster on race day when the junctions are managed. You don't have to stop. There are aid stations to pick up food. It just goes much faster. But the flip of that is accepting it's going to be much slower sometimes in training, and plan that time in. And the third element of this is, as part of having your little adventures around the country, if you can get yourself to the place where your A race is going to be, have a little journey there and go and ride the bike course before race day, you'll massively be an advantage over the you who hasn't seen the bike course before race day. Even if you're just getting to learn lines into and out of corners, where potholes are, just building up a picture in your mind's eye of what the actual event is going to look like. It is massively, massively valuable for you to get on that race, get on that race course and see what's going to be facing you come race day. So I really encourage you to go and do that. Right, tip number 7, group rides versus solo rides is a really common question. People say to me, look, I've got this big, long 5 or 6 hour Ironman training ride to do. You've set at me at certain power levels, but I'm riding out with a group from the Tri Club. They're not going at the same sort of speeds as me. Some of the time they go really slowly and chat. Some of the times they're really smashing each other up the hills. So what should I do? And so the answer is, you have to balance out your need for social contact in your training sessions against your need for how well you want to prepare for the event. Because there's no question that riding on your own, you can control your power better and be much more specifically prepared for an event that you're going to be doing than if you're at the mercy of a group. But of course, it's not just about whether you're going to be going out and getting the power numbers right. Often it's a really good opportunity to de-stress at the end of the week and get yourself to the point where you can go and have a chat with some friends and have some social time. So make sure you balance the two out. The benefits of the group rides are obvious. You get to talk to other people. The time goes faster. You'll have much more fun as you're doing it than if you're on your own, certainly if the weather isn't great. The benefits of the solo rides are going to be, you can control the power. You get to prepare really specifically for the demands of your race day event. And most importantly, remember that on race day, you'll be on your own. You won't have people to chat to. So there's an element of needing to prepare to be on your own and not have someone distract you from how you're feeling. It's a really important part of preparing for the event, is doing some of those rides on your own and getting used to how that's going to feel. Don't distract yourself with an MP3 player. Learn what it's going to feel like to ride, in the case of Ironman, for 5.5, 6.5, 7.5 hours just on your own with no one else to talk to. Ultimately, you do have to do that on your own come race day. Okay, tip number 8. Let's talk about bike maintenance and bike care. There's some essential stuff you're now going to have to start doing that you didn't have to do all the way through the winter if your bike was indoors on the turbo trainer all the way through the winter. And the first one of those is After every ride, you're going to have to make sure that it's clean and it's ready to go for the next ride. Especially true if the roads have been wet or it's been raining. You are going to have to clean the bike off. You are going to have to clean the chain, lube the chain again immediately, and make sure it's good to go. And do it as soon as you get back. There's no coming back from the point where you leave the bike in the garage and you go inside and you have a shower and get warm and dry and clean. No one's coming back out to clean the bike at that point. It'll make a massive difference to your bike, your drive chain's longevity, if you get it cleaned straight away when you get back. Okay, so take the care to get that done. If it's going to be your first outdoor ride of the year, I would suggest getting a service done. Take it to the local bike shop. Tell them it's been a while since you've ridden outdoors. Maybe get a new chain put on, but get them to give it the once over if you don't know what you're doing. Or if you do, give it the once over. Check that the brakes are working fine. Check the tires look okay. Get your tire pressure sorted. Make sure the chain's not worn. And if it is, get it replaced. And then that pre-ride inspection, get that done every time before you go. Check that there's no potential issues with the brakes. Check that the tires are okay. Check that there's no loose bolts. Get into the habit of doing that before every ride, and that will, it's much more important you do that than during the winter when it's on the turbo for the whole time. And the worst thing that happens is maybe the seat slips down as you're riding. You need to make sure all those bolts are tightened up and ready to go. Okay, and then the last tip here, tip number 9. The fueling and hydration strategies you're going to need to adjust for riding outdoors than you did for indoors. Firstly, just thinking about carrying the nutrition and fluid and the electrolytes that you need for a long ride outdoors. I recommend everybody goes out with 2 750 milliliter bottles, have the electrolytes in there that you need, carry extra electrolyte sachets with you if you're going to have to stop and add water when you're out there on the road as well. And think about carrying the right number of calories for your ride. Now, if you're racing long distance, there's a school of thought that you should go out and ride fasted, which means not eating before you go and not eating when you're out there, because, you know, the theory goes it will help you burn fat faster. Well, it doesn't. That's not what I want you doing. What you need to be doing is preparing your body and yourself for the demands of the race you're going to do. And the race is going to have you having 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight per hour. So if you're a 60 kilo person, 60 grams of carbs an hour. If you're 75 kilos, 75 grams of carbs per hour. You're going to need to get used to practice carrying that, unwrapping that, and eating that or drinking that while you're out there. If you don't do it in training, you won't be able to do it on race day. You just won't be able to. You have to practice that fueling strategy. Now, you can take those calories anywhere that you like. They can be solids, they can be drink mixes, they can be gels, they can be a mix of all of the 3. But you need to practice them, and you need to work out what works for you, what you can carry, what you can unwrap and can't unwrap, because sometimes that could be an issue as you're riding. And think of ways that if you can't physically carry all the calories, electrolytes, and water you need for 6 hours, how are you going to do that out on the road? So a real simple way to go about that is to stop when you're out on the ride and go into a petrol station, lock your bike up when you're in there, and get something really simple from the petrol station, whether that's Coca-Cola, whether that's a Snickers bar, something that's easy and mostly carbohydrate while you're out there will do the job for training if you can't carry all of the calories that you need, okay? But the closer you get to race day, the more and more you need to be figuring out, what can I take in training? How can I carry this in training that I'll be able to take with me and carry with me on race day? For some people, that's something they've never thought about. I don't want that to be you. I want you turning up on race day knowing exactly how much and when you're going to be eating and drinking and how you're going to get it, whether you can get it from the aid stations or whether you need to carry it yourself. And then the last little point on this is, as soon as you get back from your ride, have a plan for what you're going to do in terms of calories and rehydration, because if you haven't got the plan, you'll probably just eat anything that's in the house. So my big number 1 top tip here is the whey protein shake made with skimmed milk. Shake that up and give yourself 30 to 45 grams of protein and shake that up with skimmed milk. Have that as soon as you get in through the door, and that will go a long way to firstly quenching any thirst that you may have, but also replacing some protein and some calories as soon as you get in through the door. Do that as soon as you get in, have it pre-made if you possibly can, and then go and have your shower, and then decide to have something to eat when you get out of the shower. Much simpler way of doing it than coming in, trying to grab bread and make toast and grab handfuls of the kids' Haribos from the cupboard. And if you don't have a plan, you will eat everything and anything when you come in through the door. So have the plan to have something that's really nutrient dense and helps your body recover immediately. And then that way you can prioritize your hydration, you can prioritize your calories, and your body will get back to the point where you're feeling good by the time you've had your shower. Right, okay, so there's our 9 tips then for transitioning to riding outdoors. I hope the strategies help you. I hope you put them in place. If some of them have been things you've thought, yes, I know that already, then fine. For some of you, hopefully, there's some ideas there that you haven't thought of, or they've brushed something up in your mind that's going to help you on the next time you go for the outdoor ride. So we're going to wrap this up at this point. Remember, please like and subscribe on YouTube, or hit subscribe and follow on the podcast listening system that you're using at the moment. A couple of words from our sponsors. precisionfuelandhydration.com. Don't forget, you can use the code OA23 for 15% off your first electrolyte order. And at teamoxygenetic.com, I think we've got the most comprehensive endurance sports coaching program for busy age groupers, whether it's triathlon, running, swimming, swim, run, any combination of those. We have got a fantastic system that can help people out. So if you're sitting at home and you've been thinking about either contacting us for a while and you haven't done yet, or you've entered an Ironman this year and it's just occurring to you there's much more to this than you previously thought, please get in touch. There's a link in the show notes. Just click that and it'll book through to our calendars. I hope this has been useful for you. So there's links in the show notes for all those things I've mentioned, so you don't have to remember them. And until next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby, and you've been listening and watching to the Oxygenetic podcast. Until next week, I'll see you again.